Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to present our ongoing work on climate risk in clam aquaculture. Sorry, here at the AnyLogic Conference 2025. I'm Federico Cornacchia, the first author of this work, co-authored with Dr. Sebastian Raimondo, that is a mathematician and complexity scientist, and Professor Carlo Giupponi, that is a professor in environmental economics. And today with me to present this content are my co-author, Sebastian, but also Gavin Wilkinson, head of marketing at Decision Lab, representing the Decision Lab team that is supporting us with some technical aspect concerning the use of AnyLogic. I'm currently pursuing a PhD in science and management of climate change at Ca' Foscari University of Venice and in Italy. And of course, doing this PhD, the work we are about to present today is also part of my PhD thesis. I'm also a researcher together with my co-author Sebastian Raimondo at Fondazione Enrico Mattei under the supervision of Professor Carlo Giupponi in the climate change adaptation team. And to clarify what is FEEM, Fondazione Enrico Mattei, is a leading research institute, international institute, working on providing analysis on economy, energy systems, and environment. And within this overall mission, our Venice-based team focuses specifically on modeling socio-ecological systems under climate adaptation. To also underline FEEM international role, I can mention its long-standing contribution to UN climate negotiations, IPCC assessments, and also a long participation in Conference of Parties. And after its recent participation in the Conference of Parties 29 in Baku, it will be also present at the Conference of Parties in Belém, the COP30, reinforcing also its commitment in climate research and policy. And the work we are going to present today strictly relates to FEEM interest, and we are going to showcase how advanced modeling, in this case with AnyLogic, can advance also and support climate adaptation and adaptive strategies in relation to climate risks. So I'm going to leave the floor to Gavin for an introduction to Decision Lab. Thanks, Gavin.
Thank you, Federico. My name's Gavin. I'm the head of marketing at Decision Lab, and it's a pleasure to be here today with Federico and Sebastian from FEEM. It gives me an opportunity to say what excellent modeling they are doing and how AnyLogic software enabled them to begin quickly with multi-method simulation modeling. Just under a year ago, we heard from the FEEM team with an inquiry about multi-method simulation modeling. In fact, in a full circle kind of way, it was me who responded to that inquiry, just 9 days short of a year ago. So this project with regards to AnyLogic has taken place well within the last 12 months. Initially, we began with determining the software requirements of the team, but it quickly became clear that a fast start for the extended team was important, not just for Federico and Sebastian. This is where our Decision Lab Learning Lab became involved. We crafted a bespoke in-person program that combined getting to know AnyLogic elements of hybrid multi-method simulation modeling and getting started on the modeling that the team needed to be working on. And a huge word of thanks to Adam Coleman, our head of training and senior consultant at Decision Lab, for designing and delivering that program. If it wasn't for long-planned annual leave, Adam would be delivering this introduction from Decision Lab today. So following the initial setup and start, we've continued to work with FEEM as modeling consultants, supporting them as they continue to develop their model and forecasting capabilities. And we look forward to more fantastic results as the development continues. Today at Decision Lab, a key word of ours is anti-fragility. That is, in a sense, the capacity to thrive on volatility and change. With much of our world under pressure from change and human expansion into fragile habitats, it is perhaps appropriate that the work being carried out here by Federico, Sebastian, and the wider team is helping point the way to a synergy between humans, clams, and the ecosystem they share. A Venetian lagoon with a thriving clam population and a thriving economy, which, it could be said, would be the essence of Antifragile. Please enjoy the presentation and be ready with your questions. Thank you. Federico.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Thanks. And now let's dive into our work. In the background of this slide, you can see the city of Venice and the Venice Lagoon with its ecosystems and island. Today, instead of presenting a business challenge, we bring you the use of AnyLogic to address a natural resource management challenge. In particular, the management challenge of an ecosystem service. And we can define ecosystem services as the benefits that nature provide to humans. Of course, the intervention of humans in these interactions is very important. And we found this particularly interesting because there are very few, if any, applications of AnyLogic to the integrated analysis, socioeconomic analysis of complex socio-ecological systems with a particular focus on ecosystem services. And as experts in environmental systems analysis, but also environmental resource management, we are excited to share this ongoing work with the AnyLogic community, hoping to gather feedback, precious feedback from simulations experts like you. And why we chose AnyLogic? We needed a platform that could fully integrate different modeling paradigm. In this case, system dynamics modeling and agent-based modeling. But we will come back to this integration later on. Today, we talk about Manila clams that were introduced in the Venice Lagoon in 1983, and they started to colonize large areas, leading to harvesting production peaks arriving at around 40,000 metric tons per year. But since early 2000s, the landings have started to decline, and this also led to restrictions where only licensed areas can be used for clam production and harvesting. By 2023, so recently, the lagoon contained about 1,000 hectares of licensed areas, employing roughly 500 people. Despite these, clam stocks, as you can see in the plot, have continued to decline, with annual harvest now ranging between 2,000 and 4,000 metric tons. In parallel, the Mediterranean Sea is experiencing an increase in frequency, intensity, and duration of marine heat waves, and rising temperatures along with other pressures are already causing a lot of economic damages and losses. And so some farmers are even forced to completely abandon the sector. And so this leads to a critical question. That is, to what extent is clam production in the Venice Lagoon sustainable in the long term under climate-induced thermal risk? Previous studies have already modeled similar systems, but they often embed a site-specific relationship between clam mortality and temperature that are very often difficult to generalize. And they also lack dynamic integration of thermal risk and agents' adaptive behavior, leaving long-term management under uncertainty largely unexplored. And our work addresses this gap by operationalizing what is called the tolerance landscape approach. There is a recently developed temperature-dependent mortality framework. And we are going to we integrate thermal mortality and adaptive behavior in an hybrid model, allowing us to ask under what conditions does this system remain controllable through management, and when does it decouple. And so our specific objectives are to simulate clam aquaculture under rising temperatures, explore adaptive harvesting behavior in a changing climate, but also test future viability of the provisioning of this provisioning service at hand. Now I'm going to illustrate a system topology presenting what are the key components of the model we are working on. In the orange box on the top, you can see the main elements of the system dynamics model, while in the blue box at the bottom, you can see the agent-based model part. Being the two dynamically interconnected, they form a hybrid model. And again, the main reason why we chose AnyLogic is that unlike other software, it allows integration between the two modeling approaches, avoiding us to opt for loosely coupled solutions. The system dynamics model part builds on an individual bioenergetic growth framework that basically simulates how clams dynamically allocate energy to somatic tissue growth, reproductive tissue growth, and shell growth based on the scope for growth. There is the difference between anabolism and catabolism. And we use this to then translate into the evolution of clam size through time. Using the system dynamics palette in the AnyLogic environment, we built different modules for each of these growth compartments. In the bottom left part, we can see with a green square the state variable for the somatic growth. Then on the bottom right, we can see the red square for the state variables of the shell growth. And on the top right, we can see the yellow square for the state variable of reproductive tissue growth. With green circles, we have dynamic variables. With bluish ones, we have the parameters, and the linkages represent, of course, the interconnections between the elements. Then we have a fourth module that is taking as input the output of the three state variables and is reading them as shadow variables and translating these into the clam size using an allometric relationship. Here we can see an intermediate output of the system dynamics model over a 1-year period where we start from an 8 millimeter size juvenile that is seeded in the lagoon. And we see that it takes approximately 300 days to reach a minimum marketable size of 30 millimeters. And the system dynamics model presents also a part dealing with population mortality. So we have a population module and a mortality module. And besides a baseline mortality rate, we also simulate, we integrate a thermal mortality framework to model possible mass mortality events due to prolonged exposure of clams to critical temperatures. And specifically, the tolerance landscape approach that I mentioned earlier allows to derive an LT50 based mortality curve. So the dotted black curve that we see in the plot in the slide. And for each temperature, this curve provides the maximum exposure time in hours that clams can tolerate before experiencing a 50% mortality rate. And by simulating how clams die, the population module can provide an estimation of how many clams can be harvested per square meter. And so this allows us to estimate also economically the impacts that possible thermal events have on the aquaculture sector. And now I'm going to leave the floor to my colleague Sebastian Raimondo for an overview of the agent-based part. Thanks, Sebastian.
Thank you, Fede, and thank you all for being here. So now let's move to the agent-based component that is shown here in the lower part of the scheme. Here we represent a population of heterogeneous farmers of clams. Their harvesting decisions depend on basically three key elements: the size of the clams, both current and expected, the market price, both current and expected, and their perception of the thermal risk. So to capture how farmers adapt their behavior under rising temperature, we formalize their logic through a decision tree, which frames the trade-off between harvesting a secure amount of biomass immediately or postponing the harvest in the hope of obtaining more, but with higher uncertainty. So next slide, please, Fede. Okay, so here you see the scheme of a simplified version of the decision tree we are using to model farmer decisions. Our model enters this tree, once clams reach the marketable size of about 30 millimeters, given by the system dynamics module. At the initial node, A0, farmers face two options: harvest immediately or wait. If they harvest now, the final utility is already certain, so is the biomass at 30 millimeters times the current price minus the harvesting costs. We call this myopic harvester or baseline behavior. If they wait instead, they face two uncertainties: the future price and the thermal mortality. So prices might go up or down with probability P1 that you see here, and so can go up with probability P1 and go down with probability 1 minus P1. Conditional on that, the expected survival depends on heat stress. So clams are expected to survive with a certain probability 1 minus P2, or to die with a probability P2. So this probability is called perceived probability of mortality, and is based on the thermal tolerance of the clams, so from physical factors, and other factors influencing the farmer's perception that I will tell you in a moment. So each branch of this decision tree combines these probabilities. So the expected utility at the end of weighting is just a weighted sum of the utility per step weighted with the probability that I mentioned. So next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the probability P2 of mortality, the perception probability of the mortality is not the actual one, is not the probability of mortality per se, but is what farmers believe based on forecast, experience, and the level of trust that they have in the information that they possess. So this perception is summarized in a thermal risk index, which can be built in two ways that you see here. So first, with the marine heatwave definition, which we assume farmers use today. So an heat wave is when temperature exceeds the 19th percentile of the annual distribution of the temperature for several consecutive days. If such an event is forecast, farmers are more likely to harvest earlier. Second, with the tolerance landscape, we can compute this thermal risk with the tolerance landscape model, which would only be available to the farmers through an advanced forecasting service. Instead of just reporting temperature, as Federico told you before, it translates temperature and also exposure time of the clams to that temperature into this mortality risk. This is much closer to the real biological process. So once we have this index, whichever of the two versions, we feed it into into a logistic function, like the ones that you see here plotted below. In order to transform, basically, to translate the thermal risk into the perceived probability of mortality. So the slope of the curve reflects the farmer's risk attitudes and trust in the forecast services, basically. So flatter curve for risk neutral, steeper curve for risk averse, basically. So at the same time, the actual mortality of the clams in our simulation is always computed with the tolerance landscape model. That is how we obtain the real biomass and revenues in a deterministic way. So the key point here is the gap between perception and reality. And this raises another interesting economic question. So if better forecast reduces the gap and increase the profits, how much would the farmers be willing to pay for this service? With our model, we can estimate this by simulating the two alternative management scenario, let's say, and computing the marginal benefit of the improved service, with which translates into the farmer's willingness to pay. And with this, I hand it back to Fede, who will guide you through the conclusion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. Let's move on to the benefits of our work. And by using overall the AnyLogic multi-method architecture, we are able to integrate ecological dynamics and agent behavior in a single environment, an approach that is rarely adopted in ecosystem services assessment. Our framework allows us to explore adaptive management strategies and also tipping points affecting the productive systems. And it offers a replicable framework for other provisioning ecosystem services. Overall, we have both tangible benefits in terms of estimated biomass trajectories, but also projections of agents' annual revenues, and intangible benefits in terms of showcasing what is the potential of scenario analysis for medium-term decision support that can be used by resource managers and planners. Lastly, concerning the next steps, we are going to improve the model logic, complete also the agent-based model part, including the structure and the agent heterogeneity. Later on, we are going to conduct a Monte Carlo experiment for a sensitivity analysis. And we are going to further explore collaboration with Decision Lab for further support if needed. So this was our presentation. Thank you so much. We are very much open to questions and feedback if we have time. We have some minutes left, probably. I can try to access the questions. First question. Did you explore the applicability of the model in the real world? Thanks for this question. So we had some interviews with local stakeholders, so local farmers and a regional agency. And basically, as Sebastian explained, we right now the farmers act in a myopic way. So as soon as the clams, so the product reaches the minimum marketable size, the farmers do not reason too much. They just harvest everything they have at a marketable size. So we think that through local cooperations and also local organization, we can try to make the farmers understand via this framework and tool that having this kind of information, of course, it won't be a perfect information, but at least we can show how via these tools they can try to adapt in relation to climate risks. Also, I'm going to read another question. How did you came up with AnyLogic? Was it already used at your university for other subjects, or did you benchmark multiple tools and choose this one as the best fit? Because I never saw AnyLogic being used for this kind of use cases, which is super cool. Thanks for the question. So I initially proposed to the team AnyLogic because I attended a summer school last year in modeling water systems and challenges in relation to water systems. And there I met a professor from Exeter University, and this professor was involved in a project, and they were doing hybrid modeling. And that was the first time when I get to know this term, hybrid modeling. I didn't know about it before. And this professor introduced me to AnyLogic. And so I said, why not? So I thought about hybrid modeling and a way to combine this in the field of socio-ecological systems analysis where we work. So I see another question. Maybe this is for Sebastian. Maybe we can answer this. How did you model the behavior of farmers and how did you parameterize it? Sebastian, do you want to?
Yes, so the behavior of the farmers is modeled with the agent-based module inside the model, as you saw. And the parameterization, so basically the farmers are encoded in the decision tree that I shown you. And the parameterization of this model is quite complicated because we need to understand how the farmers are expected to behave today. So as Federico told you, farmers now are using that myopic harvesting profile rule because they do not know about the thermal landscape process that bring clams to death. So basically, what we need to do is to make different possible scenarios of risk aversion of the farmers, and to do so, we use different. We are exploring different ways. For example, in the decision tree, we can compute for the expected utility, or we can use also other types of algorithm to understand what is the best solution, the best choice. For example, in a risk aversion setup using a max-min algorithm, for example. And also by translating that mortality risk index in the probability, in the perceived probability of mortality with the logistic function that I've shown you before, can be tuned to understand and to explore different types of scenario in terms of human behavior, in terms of farmers' behavior.
Just to conclude, I see one question about the relation, if there is a research paper connected to this. Just briefly, we aim at having a research paper by the end of the year, at least submitted, so it can be found. Thank you.